Andrea back. Okay? So the keys for the
All right, welcome everyone. We've got people working their way into the room. Let's give a few moments for everyone to join. So just hang tight for another moment or so and we'll get started. All right, looks like we've got maybe a few folks still coming in, but out of respect for everyone who is here on time, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Tom Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of Riot and will help moderate some of the program today. But before we jump into introducing our speakers for the day, I'd like to introduce Tom Brook, the CEO of Denver South, to kind of welcome the group and give some opening remarks. So Tom, I'll hand it to you.
Great, thank you, Tom. And thank you all for joining us and taking time out of your day to spend with us today. I really appreciate that. And on behalf of Denver South, welcome to our organization and to the meeting here. I'm Tom Brook. I am the CEO of Denver South. We are a twofold organization. We have a transportation management association, which works with our local jurisdictions on transportation into and out of the region. We are the geographic region just south of Denver. We have the I-25 corridor as the main north-south corridor here, and we represent the commercial property along the southern tip of Denver into the neighboring communities of Greenwood Village, Centennial, Lone Tree, and Arapahoe and Douglas counties. We also have an economic development organization, and we're doing this meeting under the auspices of our Project Nexus, which is a critical project for us to help bring and engage the entrepreneurial ecosystem in our area and to bring more economic activity through the entrepreneurs into this area. As I mentioned before, one of our critical components for Nexus is our community. And I want to thank you all for being part of that. By joining us today, you've become part of that. And that's a critical aspect for us. So thank you. And this, as we talk today, as you're going to hear from our guest today, engagement with the community is critical. So thank you for taking that first step at least. I'd also like to thank Riot, our partners at Riot, Tom and his team. They've done a great job in coordinating today's program. And also Nicole, Karen, and Tyson for their work here today. I really appreciate their taking time out of their day to talk with us and share their experiences. I think it'll be a great conversation. Unfortunately, I can't watch it live, but I will. I told them I will watch it on video. So I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation and comments because I think they have great relevance for our region. Our topic today is partnership and collaboration. And these concepts are key to our organization. And I can tell you also from probably too many years of experience at this point in time, they are definitely key to entrepreneurial businesses. At Denver South, we believe that pilot projects and relationships between entrepreneurs, large companies, governments are vital for problem solving and for progress. This belief was behind our efforts as we formed Prime Health, whose very mission is to instigate pilot demonstration projects to advance healthcare. These are pilots between the entrepreneurs and larger organizations within the region, larger businesses in the region. To our work with the Colorado Smart Cities Alliance and their efforts to bring technology to bear on some of the most pressing problems of our society today, to our critical work with our local jurisdictional partners addressing public health and improving transportation. Pilot projects and collaboration efforts and these relationships between the entrepreneurs and the larger businesses are core to our efforts. And more importantly, they're core to success for all of our partners and for our citizens. Everyone benefits from this collaboration. The entrepreneurial efforts are critical to today's innovation. Many of the large companies recognize this, and the governments recognize this. So they are begging for the entrepreneurial community engagement in these pressing problems that they're facing, either with their customers or their citizens. And they're looking to the entrepreneurs for that engagement and that innovation. These entrepreneurs rely on their partners. With these partners, these larger companies and the jurisdictions, and their access to expertise, to experience, and to risk-taking that is vital, to opportunities to demonstrate their innovation, to refine and prove those innovations, and to prove their viability. They get access to these regions, to these expertise and this experience through those partnerships. So it's critical to the jurisdictional folks on the line, as well as to the larger companies. Your involvement with these entrepreneurs is critical. They can bring you innovation, but they need some of your expertise, some of your experience, and access to opportunities through you. The larger organizations and the jurisdictions get access to creativity and risk-taking that is not normally part of their ethos as an organization. The entrepreneurs have a very different ethos in their organization, very different culture, and risk-taking is part and parcel of their daily existence. So this is vital that they bring that in to help these larger companies and the jurisdictions address both their customers and the residents of the markets. So again, thank you for joining us all today. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Again, Karen, Nicole, Tyson, thank you for joining us. And Tom, thanks for having your group help us organize this. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Tom to take you through the moderated conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom, to you and to the whole Denver South team. We're excited to be collaborating on this series. This is the second of a three-part virtual event series, and we're hopeful soon to be back in person with more and more of these programs. But yeah, thanks again. Today's theme, as Tom mentioned, is really focused on these building of these entrepreneurial ecosystems of partnerships across different kinds of organizations, and importantly about having a bias towards action and actually running projects, running pilots. And I couldn't be more excited than the three speakers that we have today who can speak to specific collaborations that they have done together, other collaborations that they've done independently with other partners, and how maybe we can learn from some of the best practices and also the lessons learned that they've experienced through those experiences, and how that might then inform the ecosystem in and around Denver South to likewise catalyze energy and drive new programs. So with that said, we've got three speakers, and I'll list them out quickly, but I'll ask them each to introduce themselves. We have Nicole Raimundo, who's the CIO for the Town of Cary in North Carolina. Karen Lindquist, who's a co-founder and chief marketing officer for Greenstream Technologies, and Tyson Echentile, who is the Senior Global Manager for IoT and driving IoT Business Development for SaaS. So if you would, maybe I'll ask each of you just to give a little bit more depth about your own background and your organization. And Nicole, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Nicole Raimundo. I'm the CIO, as Tom said, for the Town of Cary. We're about 180,000 people. So I like to share that because people often think of town as small in population, but we're actually quite large. We sit right next to our friends in Raleigh, and obviously located in the Research Triangle Park, and great educational institutions around us, which I think really helps us as we talk a little bit more about our corporate partnership, our education partnership, and obviously the startup ecosystem. I've been with the town for about 6 years, and I think it's probably about 4 years ago when we really started delving into figuring out what this whole smart cities IoT thing was about, and worked with Tom and his team on that.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think I saw a stat recently, Nicole, that the Town of Cary is actually larger than any city in South Carolina. So you're right. It's actually quite sizable to still frame yourself that way. But yeah, thanks for being here. Karen, let's go over to you first, if you don't mind a quick introduction.
Well, hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm Karen Lindquist. I'm co-founder and chief operating officer of Greenstream Technologies. And when you're a small company, that includes chief marketing officer as well. So we are an environmental technologies firm. We are making it easier and more affordable to collect environmental data, and we are very focused on flood monitoring. We manufacture water level and rainfall sensor solutions. They report the conditions in real time to our cloud-based platform and through our APIs into our customers' systems. So our customers, who's most interested in collecting this data, is primarily government, municipal and state governments, public safety departments, resilience departments, public works, departments of transportation, IT as well, and even we have some purchases are led by economic development departments and universities. So we are a small business. We are based at the Wireless Research Center in Wake Forest, North Carolina. We are graduates of Tom Snyder and Riot's accelerator program from early 2019 now. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining. We'll dig in a little more into some of the pilots and projects that you've run around the United States here in a moment. But first, Tyson, I want to make sure to give you the chance to also introduce yourself and SaaS.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tom. So Tyson Echentile, I am a global manager within SaaS's IoT practice. So I lead a team of global business development executives that want to work strategically with partners around the globe to democratize technologies. So specifically within the Internet of Things, solve real world challenges that we'll talk about a little bit later here today, such as infrastructure resiliency and flood predictions, all the way through things like agriculture and solving the global hunger crisis. And the important aspect of that is that our team's core charter is that we recognize that when you're working with technology and IoT, you can be a participant or you can help orchestrate. And for a while, SaaS was a participant in terms of solving those complex challenges. Now we want to help orchestrate that edge to cloud stack. So that stack is repeatable. We have those strategic partnerships to bring to bear, and we can run the analytics to make the ease of implementation and extraction of that value is super simplistic and also economic, which is part of the reasons why we partner with folks like Greenstream Technologies. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And it's interesting when you talk about moving from, maybe just being a participant to an orchestrator. I think, Nicole, you also maybe discovered that a number of years back when you said, hey, these new technologies are evolving. We need to get involved, and maybe we need to take a little more ownership in driving things. And so I think we have multiple maybe conductors here that are trying to orchestrate and coordinate things, which is pretty interesting. Nicole, let's start with you though. What were the things that kind of drove you towards this kind of collaboration-based approach from the start? If you can remember back to when you really leaned in to kind of driving these coordinated projects.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest. I'm smart enough to know that I don't know it all, and smart enough to reach out to people that can help. And I think, especially from a government perspective, resources are limited and scarce, and skills. And one of the things for us was just looking around where we are. I mean, we're in the perfect physical location to tap into the talent around us to figure out how to leverage these technologies and start looking at them now before it was going to be too late, right? Before we've got all the intelligent traffic systems and everything else in place. And so, we reached out to our partners, vendors, we reached out to Riot to help us kind of come up with a plan, think it through. But I think the important part is we can't always solve our problems on our own. So, make sure you're tapping into that ecosystem around you. Everyone wants to help you, right? And I truly believe that people live, work, play in the towns and the regions. So the resources are there. I think you just you got to do the groundwork though, and get out there and tap into them.
Fantastic. Tyson, from your side, as you look at how do you take a more active role in pulling folks together, particularly maybe folks that say, is this interesting, but this is still kind of early, it's still experimental. How do you help, kind of bring those groups together and show them that, collaborating and actually driving a trial of some kind is really the right solution?
Yeah, I think Nicole said something about knowing what you know, and I've always said knowing what you don't know is equally as important. And when you think of SaaS as an analytics company, we are analytics, but you can't power an analytical model without data. But we aren't, for example, like Greenstream, right? We are not necessarily the sensor manufacturer. We're not the pipe of that data. We're not Nicole and her crew, which is the end user of that solution. So we understand that in order to deliver that value, we have to have more of an ecosystem approach, even specifically from a technology perspective. You need to make sure that you can scale that offering, the solution or use case. It needs to be able to scale as you grow. Just because we engineer and construct a solution from edge to cloud for maybe 5 assets, does that mean that you can walk away from that and put in a full-scale deployment? Is it economic? And a lot of those factors that go into that aren't only going to be solved by SaaS. So we understand that we can no longer participate in the conversations. We should help orchestrate, because when you think of analytics, it's delivering those actionable insights. And a lot of folks might say, hey, analytics is value in IoT. I would argue that all of it is equal value, because like I said previously, you can't power a model without the data. So without the data, there is no analytical insight.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Karen, you're on that data generation side. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about what Greenstream does for those who might not be familiar with you, and kind of where you fit into these larger solution stacks?
I guess you would put us at the bottom of the stack. So yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, good prediction relies on high resolution data, right? But where do you get that data? I think traditionally gathering data has been very expensive, very laborious, very time consuming. And now with a lot of the convergence of emerging technologies in the IoT industry, now we have distributed power, we have miniaturized electronics. It's possible for us to do remote sensing now very economically and report the data very frequently in real time. And that's what Greenstream does. So we don't make the sensors. We work with standard third-party sensors, but we make the real-time transceiver that reports the data, gathers the data and reports it in real time straight into our customers' platforms, like Nicole is getting, and SaaS is analyzing right now. So you've got, I guess if you think about it, you've got at the bottom of the stack, you've got the edge devices, the sensors, then you've got the communication on top of that. That's the way we see it. So we're working with both cellular communications and LoRaWAN. And then on top of that, you have the cloud platform that processes all of the data. And on top of that, you've got the data visualization for looking at it in real time. And on top of that, you've got the predictive analytics. And I'll ask Nicole and Tyson if that accurately describes also the way you see it.
Absolutely. I would argue that what you described is often perceived by the end users of technology as the maze of complexity. And so that's where SaaS and our partners want to help customers and users of IoT technologies navigate that maze of complexity.
And I think that the technology stack is very interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But at the end of the day, what the customers really care about is what is the outcome? What is the result of that analytics and all that data collection, and what does that mean towards solving an important problem, whether that's in a city or in an enterprise or for an individual consumer. Before we leave the technology discussion, however, Nicole, you have a really interesting project that you're working on right now for a piece of the stack that Karen mentioned, the communications layer. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing and some of the partners involved in your LoRa project?
Sure. We are actually partnering with SaaS, with Tyson and his team, and Semtech as well. And we're also using Microsoft, and we have a partnership to build out a LoRa network across the town. I think it's actually interesting to me because I feel like the past, maybe, I don't know, last year was a wash. So I don't know if we count last year or not, but there was so much focus on, 5G, right? And just the high speed and capabilities. And I feel like we're actually going the opposite way at some aspect, right? Because it's when we look at what type of data that we want to gather quickly, and the small bits of it that we need to make decisions on, it makes a lot more sense for us to go and put up a LoRa network. It also helps for us. We're hoping we can open it up to the community or communities to build solutions on top of, to help be able to solve problems for not just our community, but for other communities. We want to use it as a test bed. And I'll let Tyson talk about it as well, but I'm actually really excited about it.
It's really fascinating. And for those who are not maybe familiar with LoRa that are listening in, LoRa is short for long range. It's a low power, wide area network that allows really small bits of data. So things like, temperature readings, humidity readings, simple structured data versus say a camera feed, for example, to be easily transmitted over long distances with very, very little power. So you can put sensors and devices wherever you want. Batteries can last for years and years, and you can collect really interesting information. And so, Tyson, maybe I'll ask you to talk about some of the early use cases that you see SAS helping to study data that will soon be able to be collected kind of citywide towards a number of different opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of that, we'll call it an IoT Solutions Center of Excellence. It's a living lab where we're instrumenting the LoRa network, not just across the town of Cary, but also the SAS campus. And we look to expand into local academia and other surrounding regions and municipalities, because what we're doing is orchestrating those partners and the technologies is we want to have an underlying infrastructure that's horizontal and it's scalable. So to do a couple of things. One is to drive a stronger ROI on the initial technology investment for end customers and users. In addition, you can pull back into that same ecosystem. So Karen and Greenstream can provide flood sensing capabilities and the sensors that go into capturing that data. But if we wanted to change course and go into something in the industrial side, say water, wastewater, it can be on the energy and utility side, the LoRa ecosystem brings those sensors to bear as well. And they're also economic. And we know at SAS, for example, we understand that there are use cases in settings that are more a better fit for things like 5G, where you need ultra low latency. But there are also a wide variety of use cases that drive immense value back to an organization or a municipality that can communicate over a LoRa network. And if I wanted to encourage an end user to install a LoRa network, you can do so for a couple $1,000s, whereas to stand up a cell tower could say be $200,000, $300,000 minimum. So what we're doing is we're essentially trying to introduce new use cases across the town of Cary as well as our campus to create a portfolio of offerings that are built upon that same infrastructure stack. This can be things like environmental monitoring. We're going into the agriculture setting because we have a wide array of animals that actually live on the SAS campus, which is just under 1,000 acres. We're looking at things like occupancy. So in that return to work initiative post-COVID, how do we right size our occupational setting? So doing some work around that, waste and sanitation management and optimization. And then of course, a lot of things that we're going to expand and evolve with the town of Cary around their use cases and the flood prediction solution as well.
It's fantastic. I remember, Karen, in the early days of Greenstream, you would actually deploy a bunch of sensors with LoRa radios and create your own network to get the data back because there wasn't necessarily the infrastructure there. When a community puts in this kind of infrastructure and says, hey, this is a front door to entrepreneurship, like what would that have meant to Greenstream if that was available in your early days?
Well, it would have made it a lot easier for us to just come in with the devices and say, here, they work on your network. And I'm thinking actually, while Nicole and Tyson are talking, I'm thinking about those sensors that we put in the creek beds, and they're all covered over with trees and everything. So cellular transmission requires a whole lot of power, right? So we were relying on a solar panel here. LoRaWAN sensors could actually just run on the battery and we wouldn't have to worry about that issue.
Yes.
But yeah, when you have a LoRaWAN network in place, there are emerging providers that have devices that can talk on the network. One of the things that you have to watch out for is the frequency of reporting to get the battery performance. A lot of times they'll say that the battery lasts for 5 years, but that's only if you report once a day. if you're reporting every few minutes, the battery performance is a little bit different.
Sure. So
I'd
go
like to
ahead.
actually add something to that. So that's a really valid point. And so one of the things from an analytics side is that we analyze the environment to understand when we want to pull those devices for the information. If we take flooding, for example, I live in South Florida. It's a beautiful day. Now, it can change in an hour's time, but you don't need to keep pulling that information every minute, 10 minutes, or even every hour if the forecast that we're analyzing shows clear skies. When something triggers that alert, that's when the analytics can kind of speak bidirectionally. So back down that pipe and say, hey, I want to pull information every 20 minutes. Starts to rain even harder. Hey, I need to drop that down to 10 minutes. So again, you're getting the most value through a full stack solution when it's analyzing that environment and helping dictate when we pull that information to maximize that battery life.
Thanks, Tyson. We've talked a bit about some of the kind of technical infrastructure that enables us to try these new use cases, do interesting things that lead to economic development and growing small companies and creating new revenue streams for a SaaS, for example, solving city problems. Nicole, talk to us a little bit about not the technology side of collaboration, but how do you make the Town of Cary available? Like, what are the things you've learned about how to run pilot studies effectively, how to engage entrepreneurs, how to partner?
Yeah, good question. Well, we've learned a lot, but it really, I'm going to be honest, it's getting out of your seat. I like to say that all the time. You got to get out of your building and your seat and go meet other people, right? Like go to events at Thrive, go see what's happening at NC State, start to really network, talk to your current partners and vendors and see what's out there. But I think it's starting those discussions, getting everyone in a room, collaborating, but it really, I like to talk about, like, a lot of my job is not sitting in my chair, right? Like, it's really getting out there in the community, talking to people and being, sort of collecting all of the information and bringing it back and seeing who's going to partner with us. We worked with our other municipalities, right? It's important for us in Cary that we're setting an example for other communities and delivering services in a way that we know our smaller surrounding communities can build it, right? So that's part of what we're trying to do, is to demonstrate, lean on the community around you. They will help you, but you do have to get out there and start talking to the right people that can help you, and just share the message and the collaboration.
Fantastic. Tyson, from the large industry side, what are the effective ways that you have found to maybe engage entrepreneurial organizations like Greenstream and others? Are there tools and processes in place to enable that?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things that we do at SAS. So one, we foster a strong partnership and relationship with academic institutions. That's kind of core to who SAS is. Obviously, coding in the SAS language for model development is one aspect of that, but we also host things like global hackathons. And so that helps engage the technology community, sponsoring organizations like Riot, really ingraining ourselves into the entrepreneurial spirit. We actually have an upcoming hackathon where we're trying to figure out how our IoT division and our partners can work together and leverage this living lab environment and all the data that we're generating to offer that up to entrepreneurs that are looking to crack into the IoT space, to harness that data and be able to deliver value on top. So definitely, as Nicole said, getting out of your seat, networking, being a part of the community, and understanding that it does truly take a village. I only see a couple of faces on top of my screen, but I do see a Mr. Jim Haskins, who I've seen in my past life at PTC while he was at Cisco. So we do have a close-knit community. And if you just reach back into that organization, there's a lot of valuable nuggets that can be brought to bear from even just the network you have through your own path in life.
Well, one of the things that I have been impressed with, as I've gotten a chance to work with SAS and observe SAS over the years, is when you do these hackathons, the first thing that entrepreneurs that we work with talk about when they want to engage is, how do we create this incredible solution? But really, a lot of the value isn't just hacking together a new solution to a particular challenge, but the fact that those solutions that work a large organization like SaaS can help that entrepreneur to really scale and become a sales channel. And so it's more than just the technology solution. It really is a business development opportunity that benefits, you know, all parties involved.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's kind of a page out of my own personal playbook, is always having an eye on how do I get to high scale? Who are my force multipliers that I can work with? It's part of the reason why SaaS has partnered with various organizations on, say, our technology or even a core set of solutions. And we have the same mentality for those that want to look to SaaS as an enterprise grade company that brings an ecosystem and a network. We bring enterprise sellers that have boots on the ground. And again, I think we recognize to kind of go back and say, know what you know and know what you don't know. We also know that we're an analytics company. We want to play in that area of analytics. And yeah, we might dabble a little bit outside of that parameter or those margins, but it's better for us to partner with an entity, whether it be a startup or a truly, Fortune 10 organization that owns those swim lanes. Because when you bring together, the best practices and kind of this industry level standard, that's when you're going to have successful pilots that are launched, solving those challenges and then scaling them out collectively as an ecosystem.
That's great. Karen, I want to ask you a question or two about scaling, from the small company perspective. Before I do, I want to remind the audience, we would love to hear any of your comments or questions. Feel free to put those in the chat as we're going, and then we'll add those into the conversation as we go. But to the question of scaling, obviously, getting involved in pilot projects like the stormwater project, and I'll ask you, Karen, to talk a little bit more about that project so people can know the origin of that and how you've managed to share data across jurisdictions and other things. But as you think about scaling, how do these kind of projects influence the trajectory of your company, and how do you leverage that?
Okay, well, yeah, first of all, I think that was part of our strategy anyway, in terms of working with customers. You are a new company with a new technology, and on top of that, we are new to the area. And again, being part of, getting out of your seat and being part of the community, especially the Riot community, has opened many doors for us. We would not have met Nicole. We wouldn't have met Tyson and Jim Haskins. I see you. We wouldn't have met all of these wonderful people if it hadn't been for the Riot community. That they're really good at nurturing and keeping it going. But yeah, we usually look for pilot projects as a way to prove ourselves. And we will start with a small project. Also, because most of our customers are government customers, so you want to start with something that is under a certain spending threshold. And we work together. And particularly in the case of Cary, they had a set of unique requirements. So it required us to create a lot of enhancements on our product in its form factor, but then also in the back end in terms of pushing our data into Microsoft Azure and onto SaaS. And it was a lot of effort and it was a lot of expense, but what we got out of it was immense learning and enhancement and development of our product, so that we have capabilities that we would have been much slower to develop otherwise. So for example, now we're able to talk to the three big cloud providers: Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, and AWS. And that was thanks to this pilot project with Cary. Because of their requirements, our hardware can now send data to two platforms simultaneously. Our hardware is FirstNet compliant, which is a dedicated network for first responders. That wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Cary's requests. We've refined our smoothing and filtering algorithms, again, thanks to the Cary pilot. And we have added additional sensors to our platform that we now sell to other customers. And again, that was thanks to the Cary project. And I think about the very first pilot project we ever did. It was a proof of concept. I think we earned all of $7,000. And today we are handling, I think, our biggest project yet, that started with a very tiny project We're working on a $400,000 project. I'm not quite sure how we got here, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to get out of it. But yeah, it works. Start small, build trust, deliver value, communicate the value. I think especially as small companies, we have to keep on communicating the value we're delivering, because it's easy for us to get lost in the shuffle. And I think developing multi-level relationships, one of the things that I've observed is that you make a great contact in a large government customer or in a large company, and that's fantastic. But there's a lot more turnover in those companies than there are in ours. So, you know, people retire, people take other jobs, change their jobs quickly. So it's good to have multiple contacts, and also to remember that even though people may change their jobs, you will see them again in the community. So practice your best integrity and be nice to everyone.
So several times in your answer, you discussed community, you discussed partners. You founded the company up in Virginia and started some of your first work there. You've now relocated to North Carolina. Help contrast kind of the differences that you see, at least in the two regions in which you've operated your business, and kind of what was the trigger that made you decide we need to move our headquarters?
So I think it's not just a question of the state, it's a question of the region that you're in. And we are from coastal Virginia, and we love it and we miss it, and we still have our family there. But when we started the company, we said, okay, this is a technology business, it's an IoT company. We will be able to grow the company much faster if we can go to an area where there's a lot more of this type of activity happening. And we started looking around, and there are several hotspots in the country, but we decided that the Triangle area would be the best for us because it's close to home, and because at the time, 2018, when we were having this conversation, it was much more affordable. But yeah, we knew it was growing, and it has grown a lot. The catalyst for coming here was actually being accepted onto the RIDE Accelerator program. So then we said, you know what, we're going to move. We moved the company, we moved ourselves, we bought a house in Wake Forest. And I think, it wasn't just a question of blindly moving because of the accelerator and because of the community down here, but it was it's the culture of the community as well. Very smart people, but still friendly and approachable. We like that. This spirit of collaboration, it permeates everything, and it's just a wonderful place for us to be.
Tyson, maybe the same question to you from the opposite angle. You're headquartered in Cary, but a multinational organization working all over the world with customers of all sizes on all continents. How do you connect to those entrepreneurial communities around the world?
Well, being a global entity, we do lean on our local resources. Here in the RTP area, SAS has been a longstanding, citizen of that community with our campus, our headquarter campus being there. But we have, I think it's over 120 offices worldwide. So we lean on our local regions to facilitate and sponsor those relationships. So for example, we have a team that we work with out of the Benelux region that hosts various hackathons. Our hackathon concept was actually birthed out of the Nordic region, and the whole concept of accelerating technology adoption through more of an incubator approach. So we take different elements of what different regions are doing and fostering that outreach to the community. And then we try to deploy those best practices on a global scale. And then of course, starting here in our region in the US. But I will say to Karen, I was actually waiting to say, well, did you get into the Cary area pre-2019? And you did, because now trying to move there, clearly you made a smart decision, as I think shortly thereafter, Apple and Google, they announced that they're coming to town, clearly have top secondary education in the local universities. But I think that plays into each individual that's within business development at SAS, right? We all have our own entrepreneurial spirit and cap on to say, where can I reach into a community that brings all the different elements that I need? The academic side, the technology side, the entrepreneurial spirit, and the organizations that want to drive technology adoption. But I think a key to that is also those that actually want to use the outcome of the technology that we develop. So looking for those, whether it be a municipality or it's a manufacturing company that's looking to go through a digital transformation, because that's equally as important. And we're talking to Nicole in the town of Cary, who some might say, well, they're just a small town. Well, they're as innovative as any municipalities I've seen across the globe. And there's this concept I learned in college of learn one, do one, teach one. And so every municipality, and you could say New York City, you could say Raleigh right down the road, they're going to look to their peers to say, who has done this successfully and what was the return? So we also look for who are those that are putting a stake in the ground and saying, I want to lead the digital transformation. And then we can take that ecosystem, those entrepreneurs, all the way up to SaaS as an enterprise company, and go and work with those that want to implement the technology to solve those complex challenges.
That's fantastic. What advice might you have? A great deal of our audience today is in that Denver South region. If there's an entrepreneur out there that has an idea and says, what, I think this might be really complementary to Dish Networks or to Arrow or to one of the other large companies in the area. What's good advice for how a smaller organization approaches a big corporate and says, I think there might be an opportunity to partner?
Yeah, and I'll talk through the lens of IoT. IoT doesn't have to be complex. You can solve a very basic challenge that has a high ROI and net, gain at the end of that tail. And so what I would say is it also comes down to, I'm going to say a commercial model. If you're looking for that key force multiplier, find what your value is inside of that ecosystem and how you complement what they're trying to capture in the market. So you had mentioned Dish, you had mentioned, even if you look at CenturyLink that has offices there, right? They are a telco company that has high access to customers. They are not a technology company necessarily. They want to solve business challenges and drive business solutions. Creating a solution that solves their customer problem that can drop into their technology requirement, that's where you can get on the fast track to high scale.
And how similar, Nicole, is that to you as you think about how people potentially approach you with solutions to things for your residents?
Yeah, and I was just going to comment because Tyson and I talk about it all the time in terms of when we talk about Cary and its size. There's way more Carys in the world than there is, right? The New York cities, Chicago, the big cities. And so I think that's, one of the important things for the way we look at trying to solve problems is we know there's a lot more of us than there is in the big cities in terms of budget and the way that we do it, that we want to make sure that's that model that's repeatable. In terms of startups, we are wide open to testing and learning because a lot of it is, even if we don't use this solution, right? And we didn't talk about this, but Tom knows, and I think everyone else knows that we started learning about IoT by building a lab, right? Using our campus as a lab. And it wasn't so much about what the use cases were as it was about the learnings, right? We learned very quickly that everybody has a dashboard and we don't need a million dashboards, right? We want it to be API, and Karen talked about that, right? Consumption of the data. We have IoT rat traps or rodent traps on campus, right? Is that a problem for us? No. But it is about the learnings, and it's about the learnings not only for us, but for that company, right? That company, is Bayer Crop Science. You introduced us, I think, Tom. They want to see what that looks like out in the fields and in the crops. And so we're just providing literally a living lab for both of us to learn. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's that exact technology that we're going to implement someday. It might very well be. We hope that works out. But I think it's a great way for both of us to learn from whatever it is, whatever the piece of technology is, or just the consumption of the data and pushing the data. So we are wide open to doing that. I think it's a model that's very repeatable for other municipalities as a way to learn about IoT before they ever go out and scale. Like I always think about, we put in parking sensors, I call them the hockey pucks, the one that go in the ground. Great learning experience. Would never implement that as a solution today, right? But you look back and say, well, thank goodness we didn't just throw those all over the street somewhere. So I think it's important that you have, the ability to reach out into the community and work with folks and figure out what the needs are. And really what our needs are as a government are going to be similar to other government entities. So it's a great way, as Karen pointed out, on collaboration. And we said, well, we needed to have an open API. Well, we really wanted to be on FirstNet because those requirements for her are going to be requirements when she goes, whether it's an RFP or go sell it to another municipality. So I think it's a great relationship and collaboration.
Fantastic. And I want to come back in a moment to the question of learning because you're doing something very interesting in your next step of your educational journey. But first, I think we have a few questions coming in. So I'd like to invite Chris Shepard to join me and relay a couple of the audience questions if you have them.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Chris Shepard. I'm in Denver South. And actually, these aren't audience questions. They're some of my own because this is just such a great case study for Denver South to be looking at these examples. Tom Brook had mentioned we have 6 jurisdictions that are part of the Denver South region. So this is to Nicole. Kind of 2 questions. How do you vet the technologies that come through in advance? A lot of our jurisdictions are members of the Smart Cities Alliance, and there's a lot of very early stage companies that come through. So I would love to know if there's a best practices or a template for how Cary has, kind of gone through and minimized risk for the city.
Yeah, and I will say, because we built it as a lab and we can put things on our campus in a controlled environment, that's going to eliminate a lot of risk. We also built out a contract that it's typically with a startup or the vendor, it's a low cost or a no cost, which is important for a whole bunch of reasons. But within that contracting vehicle, we can also then purchase directly. So we don't have to then go out for a bid or RFP depending on the price. And the contracts outline some of our requirements that we have around security, open API, and whatever. I'm more than happy to share that with you.
That would be great. My second question, follow on, is are you, so this is all around IoT, are you looking at other areas of the city that aren't IoT focused to do the same type of things, like other type of technologies?
Yeah, it's interesting because I always say at the end of the day, it's really not IT problems that we're solving. We're solving business problems, and they are going to be in some way or another all IT projects, right? So whether you're in public works or finance or whatever department in a municipality, all of your challenges, I shouldn't say all, I say all just because my position, but are going to have some form of technology. And so we have a group that we have a committee that's representative of everyone within the town that we really talk about what those challenges are and whether technology is the right vehicle to solve it. It is mostly around smart cities technology, but we really believe we have to do a lot of education within our departments to get people to understand how they can use technology to solve problems. It's not always the answer, but there is a lot out there and a lot of solutions. And so for us, it's really about educating the departments and letting them have their voice and making sure that they understand, the value that we can bring to the table and helping them, right? We're just helping them. We're orchestrating, solving their problems. So, yeah.
That's great. Tom, do you mind if I ask one more question before I hand it back?
Go for it.
This is for Tyson. Denver South is kind of known as the corporate capital in the state of Colorado. So we have 6 of the state's Fortune 500 companies in the region. And then we have hundreds of companies that are kind of in the, hundreds to thousands employees, probably not as big as SAS, but most of them are global. How do you all, I would love to be able to advise these companies. We're going out to them now and trying to get them engaged with the startup community and with our jurisdictions. And we're getting a little pushback. What would you advise to these companies on what they should consider as they're considering getting involved in the startup community?
This could be controversial depending on who's on the call. So has anybody heard of a company called Honeywell? Most likely. Well, there was another company that was once a startup that ate their lunch in Nest. And so enterprise companies, you got to constantly trying to evolve and to think outside of the box. And that is working with entrepreneurs that could be the next Nest, right? They could develop something. And wouldn't it be great to have, if you're SaaS, our event stream processing agent going back, 10 years ago in product development that sat and ran, on-device analytics within the Nest offering or platform. So one is, it should be a part of the natural process just to evolve your products. A lot of talent that's hitting the tech space want to be entrepreneurs and start their own business. So working with them and fostering that, I think, is also kind of that corporate citizenship that I would encourage some of these Fortune 100 companies to have ingrained in their offering towards the community. But certainly there's multiple lenses to look at it. It's being able to, and this is kind of the enterprise lens, you can harvest a lot of that talent and bring them into your organization. Because I think we all know that there are failed projects or companies, but we'll just call it the smarts and the technology savvy that those individuals have can still come work for your organization. And it might be their second or their third venture that ends up being that multi-billion-dollar company, but you might be a part of it, whether it's employing those individuals, whether it's sponsoring those projects. I think that helps drives longevity in the enterprise space, because there are many players that want to infringe and dethrone somebody that's Fortune 500, 110 on an annual basis.
I have a question that's come in from the audience saying, we're talking a lot about scaling. How do we make it easy to take maybe some of the things that have been learned in North Carolina and scale to other regions, scale those solutions to Denver or to other regions? What are some thoughts there? And whoever wants to jump in, I don't know, Karen or Tyson, if you have a view on that from the business side.
I can hop in. Sorry, I was given the floor too, since I just spoke. I think that has to be a thought that goes into the development of a solution. It kind of goes back to if you're a startup and you're looking at developing a product or a software offering, how do you make it easy to consume at scale and with the masses? So when we develop our solution, do we ever say we're exclusive to one set of technologies? No, we might be optimized. It might be engineered out of the box for that technology. But once we're exclusive to, say, a security mechanism or a network, what happens is that we then minimize, the pool that we can sell into or that we can tap into. So we look at it from more of an open and flexible agnostic approach that still delivers that value. I think Nicole said something that's extremely important. We can talk about IoT technology, or we can talk about cloud infrastructure or backend IT/OT integrations. But at the end of the day, all of these technologies, they come together to solve a challenge. And as long as that challenge has a wide market potential, that's where you want to look and make decisions on how do you capitalize on what we would call the total addressable market and not minimize it where you only can appeal to a small portion of that market.
Thanks. That's a great point. I'll add too. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to answer a question as the moderator, but I'll add one of the things that we found to be very successful. We mentioned the stormwater project at the beginning. We brought together, Riot did, municipalities, startup companies, big industries, the state government, lots of different stakeholders to build out an open source framework for just how data would be shared between municipalities. And in this case, of course, that was a smart city application, but in the same way that standards are open source and how we might just communicate information or protect data, there are things that can move markets forward in a scalable way. And by taking an approach of first just building out a framework of here's how a solution might work in the IoT space, has enabled now for Greenstream sensors to be deployed in multiple counties and municipalities statewide. And so, by creating those kind of frameworks, I think can also help with the scaling. The question then is, how do you take those frameworks and make them known in other places and other communities so that folks can opt in and try these out. And a lot of the legwork's already been done. So there's, I think, a lot of kind of a marketing and storytelling piece that needs to be attached to every technology project.
Yeah, I think just one other point to add on that is not to be Noah's Ark, right? Don't build it and hope that they will come. Seek feedback, iterate on what you're offering, and meet what the market's requirements are and expectations, rather than working in an isolated silo and hope that the customers will flow in because it's a great idea to an individual.
Yeah, wonderful. We have a question that says, this particular conversation is focused on cities and municipalities. I think that what we have learned actually translates to all kinds of industry applications. It's not necessarily unique just to public-private partnerships. But what about engaging rural areas, other maybe more underserved communities? Any thoughts on driving pilot projects and collaborations outside of our urban centers? Karen, you've worked in a lot of fairly remote places. Do you have any thoughts on that?
We work with communities large and small. And I think one of the really interesting things that we haven't mentioned yet that we've done in the Triangle area, led by the Town of Cary and led by Riot and Greenstream, is regional data sharing. So not just a smart city, but smart regions. So as soon as Cary started its stormwater project and announced, why don't we work on this data sharing project, I got calls from the surrounding smaller communities saying, we'd like to put sensors in as well because we want to participate, right? I think the promise of IoT is that you can have solutions that are low cost enough so that even, I can talk mostly about flood monitoring, small communities who couldn't even afford a single stream gauge before now can afford to put in 10 of them, for example. I think the affordability of IoT is one thing. The second thing is the aspect of actually how do they consume the data, right? And that's why a company like ours also offers dashboards for small communities that don't have a sophisticated internal IT department like Cary. But the third thing is the data sharing. So in North Carolina, we are blessed with a statewide flood monitoring system. And any community that wants to put in sensors, they can actually, and we will help them, share the data up to the statewide system so that they can see their data compared to everybody else on a big map of, where is it flooding, when, what's happening upstream from me, what's happening in my community, how does it impact my neighbors downstream, so they can all collaborate not only amongst partners, but also, at different hierarchical levels in government in terms of response during a flood event. So I think that's how small communities can benefit from their neighbors and can also contribute. It's like a larger community, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to take a couple of audience questions and combine them. This will be the last audience question before we get into some closing remarks here. But Nicole, what was the initial catalyst to drive your living lab? Was that an internal decision? Was that a political or community-driven decision? And did you leverage like grant funding, or how did you operationalize that from the start?
It was an internal decision, and and like I said, and Karen, you were talking about urban, and I kept thinking, well, that's the benefit also of using startups, right? They're always looking for use cases. The rural areas. So I think that's the benefit there. But for us, it was, it really, again, didn't cost us very much money at all, because the way we set up our contracts were either no cost or low cost. Now, at that time, I will say there were a lot of folks that were still learning, right? And they are still learning. IoT was fairly new in the space that we were in. And so to get the partnerships and folks in was not a challenge. We had to go out and work. We work with big companies, whether we worked with Cisco, we worked with Trilliant, we worked with smaller companies, but we did it at almost no cost. And the important thing for us, as I look back and say, it was really to demonstrate that we were doing all the work up front to make sure we understood whether we needed a platform, what security was going to look like, what ingesting data was. I mean, there were times where we would just pull back all sorts of data and we're like, well, we really only need a little piece. Like, it was all about learning and being able to then demonstrate it, and that we really thought this through and wanted to test and learn before we ever put something out beyond our lab, paid off in dividends, because we educated folks in the town who at first were like, you know, why are you guys wasting your time on this? Until you watch them have light bulb moments. And for our council and town manager that provide the funding, right? So then when, you know, you fast forward a year or two later, when we go and ask for money for some type of smart city solution, or even to expand the lab, it's much easier for us to get that money from, because we did the lab first, because we went through all the testing, we worked with partners, we kind of demonstrated before just going out and doing some sort of point solution, you know, whether it be with lighting and then end up trying to manage a million different things and it being wrong. So I think the way we did it was smart, and was like no cost.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a model you could still do today, because there are lots of people in this space that want to, you know, get their products into a municipality or want people to test it and learn from it. So my suggestion is that's the best way to do is build the lab.
Just do it. Fantastic.
Yeah,
We will make sure anyone who would like to reach out and learn more about, you know, how that happened or how to get started, we'll make sure to facilitate those connections. You're welcome to reach out to us at riot.org, and we can help facilitate connections. Thank you very much to our speakers. We're right up on time. Chris, are there any closing remarks you'd like to share?
Sure, just like a quick 1 minute, Tom. You know, we've really appreciated the relationship we've had with Riot over the past year. You brought so much knowledge and connections to us. Project Nexus, which is our entrepreneurial ecosystem development effort, is about a year old. And so this has been really helpful, because we know all of these pieces are so important for entrepreneurs and for the startups to grow within the region. So it's the pilot opportunities, the connections to the large companies like SAS, and then of course the access to capital is another one. So I can't forget to mention that on December 14th from noon to 1 Mountain Time, we'll have another one of these programs focused on creative connections to startup capital. We're bringing in the president of the Angel Capital Association and then OmniSync Inc. And so it'll be a conversation between Tom Snyder and Tom Brook on other places to find capital. Nicole, Tyson, and Karen, you guys have been fantastic. We probably will be following up with you all to get more of your ideas and templates and all of that. So it was great listening to you today.
All right. Thanks again to everyone for joining, for listening in, for asking questions, and thanks to the panelists. I know it's difficult to do an applause over Zoom, but we'll pause for a virtual applause and say thank you for your time.